August 1944. The war had already dragged on for 5 long years, and across Europe the skies thundered with Allied planes, while on the ground the Wehrmacht desperately tried to hold its crumbling lines. But then the German command made a shocking discovery. Something they could hardly believe. They had captured one of America's most secret weapons. No, not a new tank, not some mysterious rocket. It was something far more dangerous. A man, a pilot, and not just any pilot, an airman carrying knowledge the Germans were never meant to have. His name was hidden under layers of military secrecy, his mission classified, his capture a nightmare scenario for the Allies. The Germans moved him quickly, deep into the Reich. He was interrogated, pressed, prodded. Every scrap of information they could squeeze out of him they would try, because this wasn't just about one man. You see, by 1944, the Allied air forces had begun to dominate. The daylight raids of American B-17s and B-24s, escorted by P-51 Mustangs, were ripping apart German industry. Cities burned, factories fell silent. The Reich's once mighty Luftwaffe was bleeding to death. And yet, in this prisoner, the Germans believed they had found a way to strike back. They thought they could turn him. They thought they could break him. But what they did not understand was that behind every Allied airman stood not just a squadron, not just an army, but the weight of a free people determined to crush tyranny. The pilot was led down cold stone corridors, into a dim chamber where shadows loomed across the walls. His captors asked questions, their voices sharp, insistent. They wanted codes, they wanted tactics, they wanted the heart of America's air war. But he gave them nothing. Only silence. Only the steel of resolve, and that silence frustrated them more than any insult could. Outside, the war raged on. In France, the Allies had broken out of Normandy and were racing across the countryside. Paris was on the brink of liberation. The Reich was shrinking, its defenses cracking, its armies exhausted. And yet, in a quiet cell far from the front, a different battle was unfolding. A battle of will, a battle of endurance, one man against an empire. The Germans didn't know it yet, but their time was running out. The cell was cold. Damp stones pressed their silence into him. The kind of silence that gnaws at a man's mind. Each drip of water echoed like the tick of a clock, reminding him that time moved on, even here, behind the iron bars of captivity. He thought of home, of skies back in America, where summer winds swept over endless fields. He remembered the hum of engines during training flights, the proud moment when the instructor finally nodded and said, "You're ready." Ready for war, as if anyone ever truly could be. But here, in this narrow cage of concrete, his thoughts were a weapon. Memory was resistance. Every time the interrogator leaned in close and demanded answers, every time they promised safety in exchange for betrayal, he clung to those memories. He would not give them the satisfaction. The Germans tried everything. Some came in shouting, fists pounding the table, veins bulging with anger. Others came quietly, speaking softly, almost kindly, as though they were old friends simply wanting to talk. But behind both masks lay the same hunger, desperation. By August 1944, the Reich was desperate indeed. The pilot knew this. He didn't need intelligence briefings to understand it. He had seen the firestorms from his cockpit window. He had watched flak towers spew their desperate fury into the skies, while American squadrons pressed on, wave after wave. He had seen P-51s slice through German defenses like falcons among pigeons. And so he held his silence, because he knew the truth. The war was turning, and nothing, no threat, no bargain, could change that.
Still, the days dragged on. The interrogations bled into nights. Harsh lights burned into his eyes. Questions repeated until the words themselves lost meaning. Sometimes they left him alone for hours, the silence more punishing than any shouted demand. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. Thirst cracked his lips. Fatigue pressed his eyelids down like lead. And yet he endured, because endurance was victory. Every hour he denied them, every secret kept locked inside, was another blow struck against the Reich. But what he did not know was that his silence was costing the Germans more than frustration. It was costing them time. For outside that prison, the Allies were advancing. Normandy was behind them now. Paris would soon be free. Patton's tanks rumbled across the French countryside like an unstoppable tide. British, American, Canadian, and Free French forces surged forward, their banners snapping in the wind. Each day that the pilot sat in silence, refusing to yield, was another day the Reich crumbled a little further. Each unanswered question was another nail in the coffin of Nazi Germany. Sometimes, in the darkness of his cell, he whispered to himself, "Hold on, just hold on, they're coming." And though no one answered, he believed it. He had to. Because faith in his comrades, faith in his nation, was all that stood between him and despair. Then something changed. The questions grew sharper. The Germans pressed harder. There was urgency now in their eyes. Rumors swirled through the corridors. Guards spoke in hushed German, their words clipped, anxious. Something was happening out there, something the Reich feared. And one night, through the narrow slit of his cell window, he heard it, the distant rumble of explosions, not bombs dropped from high above. No, this was closer, heavier, the sound of artillery. The front was moving nearer. Liberation was coming.
Dawn crept through the narrow slit of the prison wall. Gray light touched the stone floor, and with it came a sense of unease. The air felt different, heavy, charged. Even the guards moved differently this morning. Quick glances, hurried steps, their boots clanging like warning bells down the corridor. Something was happening. The pilot rose from his cot, bones aching from nights on cold stone. He pressed his ear against the wall. Beyond the muffled silence, faint tremors rattled the earth. It wasn't the thunder of storms. It was the thunder of war. For weeks he had held fast. The interrogators had come with their threats, their promises, their lies wrapped in silk, and for weeks he had given them nothing. Not a name, not a squadron, not a target. Each refusal was a battle, each silence a victory. But this morning it seemed as if fate itself was shifting. He remembered something one of the guards had muttered the night before, thinking the prisoner asleep. "They are too close," the man whispered in German. "Too close." The Allies were advancing. The pilot's heart surged at the thought. He pictured endless columns of Shermans grinding across fields, their engines growling like beasts. He imagined the skies above, alive with Mustangs and Thunderbolts, their wings flashing silver as they carved through clouds. He could almost hear the voices of comrades carried on the wind, young men from Kansas, from Ohio, from Brooklyn, marching forward, determined to end the nightmare. "They're coming," he said. And yet the waiting gnawed at him. Hours dragged by like days. Guards barked sharper orders. The interrogators stormed in once more, their faces lined with desperation. "Tell us," they demanded. "Where will the next strike fall? What are the routes? How many planes?" Their voices cracked not with power, but with fear. He saw it now. The Reich was breaking. Even here, within the concrete walls of captivity, he could feel it, the weight of a crumbling empire pressing down on its jailers.
And so he endured. No matter the questions, no matter the hunger twisting his stomach, he endured. Because he knew every second he denied them was another second closer to freedom. Then came the night. Darkness draped the prison like a shroud, but it was not silent, not anymore. The ground trembled, faint at first, then stronger. Windows quivered in their frames, and in the distance a low roar grew, the kind of roar no storm could carry. Artillery.
Boom after boom rolled across the night. The front was moving closer. The Allies were pushing forward, inch by inch, yard by yard, and now the sound of liberation rattled through the boons of the prison itself. He hold on. He told himself, just hold on. But the Germans felt it too. Guards whispered nervously in the corridors. Officers barked orders with a sharpness that betrayed their fear. Documents were hurriedly carried down hallways, burned in stoves that belched black smoke into the night. Something was unraveling. And the prisoner understood. The war was about to pass him by or consume him where he stood. Hours blurred. Sleep would not come. Every sound, every vibration in the walls spoke of change. At one moment he thought he heard engines rumbling, a convoy perhaps, retreating. Another time, the faint crack of rifles carried on the night wind. And then he smelled it. Smoke. Not the smoke of the prison stove, but something heavier. The air itself seemed thick with it, seeping through the cracks, filling the lungs with the unmistakable scent of war drawing near. Liberation was not a dream anymore. It was at the gates.
Midnight came and went. The prison, once a place of routine silence, now throbbed with unease. The walls, thick, gray, unfeeling, seemed to hum with distant echoes, the kind of echoes men recognize in their bones. The front was moving closer. The pilot lay awake, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling above him. Sleep had abandoned him days ago. In its place came visions, memories of home. A mother waving from a porch in Indiana, a sweetheart pressing a letter into his hand before he boarded the train. A father, too proud to cry, gripping his shoulder one last time. Chuckles sadly. Those faces had kept him alive through hunger, through beatings, through endless questions. And tonight those same memories seemed to whisper, "Hold on, just one more day." But one more day in war can feel like a lifetime. From beyond the barred window came strange sounds. Engines, perhaps. At first distant, then closer. Were they German convoys fleeing the front? Or whispers, could it be American armor grinding its way through the countryside? The uncertainty gnawed at him. Each clank of metal, each rumble in the earth set his pulse racing. Yet he dared not hope too much. Hope was dangerous. Hope could break a man quicker than torture. Firmly. But he held it anyway, because sometimes hope is the only weapon left. Morning returned with fire in the sky. The horizon glowed red, smoke curling upward like a signal. From the courtyard he glimpsed it, the rising plumes drifting above the tree line. The sound of artillery was no longer faint. It was sharp now, close, very close. The guards knew it too. Their voices rose in frantic arguments. German barked against German. One shouted about orders from Berlin. Another cursed about the Americans.
Pause. They were afraid. The interrogators came once more, their eyes bloodshot, their coats unbuttoned. This time, the questions weren't sharp blades, they were desperate pleas. "Tell us," they begged, "where will the next blow fall? Which towns? Which bridges?" Their hands shook as they slammed fists on the table. Chuckles bitterly. The mighty Reich, reduced to trembling in the face of defeat. And still, he gave them nothing. Silence. Only silence. Each moment he refused felt like a victory, not for himself, but for the thousands of men out there pressing forward through mud and fire. For every B-17 droning above the clouds, for every Sherman tank clawing its way down narrow French roads, his silence carried weight. By noon, the prison was in chaos. Trucks arrived, engines idling nervously. Prisoners were ordered into lines, their numbers counted again and again, as if accuracy could stop what was coming. Guards barked, rifles clutched tight, sweat beading beneath steel helmets. And then something extraordinary. The faint, unmistakable growl of aircraft engines. The pilot froze, eyes lifting to the sky. Shadows passed overhead, fast, low. The roar was deafening, the kind only Allied fighters carried. Then came the cracks of machine guns stitching across the countryside, followed by explosions that shook dust from the prison rafters. They were here. The Allies were here. Prisoners cheered in their cells, voices rising like a hymn. But the guards shouted them down, slamming rifle butts against doors. Fear and rage poured into the corridors. The interrogators vanished, documents stuffed into briefcases, orders forgotten. Somewhere, fires were lit, papers burned in frantic piles. The Reich was erasing its secrets before the Americans arrived. But in their haste, they left behind one secret they could not erase. A man, a prisoner, a witness to their collapse. Night fell again, but the darkness was different now. It was alive. The horizon pulsed with fire, artillery flashes lighting the sky like storms. Each rumble shook the ground beneath him. Each distant blast carried with it a promise: freedom was coming. And in his heart he made a vow. If he survived this night, if he stepped free from these walls, he would carry the memory of every man who never made it home. He would tell their stories. He would remember their names, because war may break nations, but memory keeps them alive. And so he waited, one last night, one last test of endurance. For in the morning the gates of hell would open, and beyond them the world would change forever.
The morning broke, not with silence, but with thunder. The prison walls shuddered as artillery rolled across the horizon. The sound was so near now it rattled the iron doors, shook dust from the ceiling, and sent guards scrambling like ants whose hill had been struck. It had come at last, the front. The pilot stood, muscles trembling, hands pressed against the cold bars. From somewhere beyond the walls came a sound he hadn't heard in months, the heavy, rhythmic thud of tank tracks. Allied armor was on the move. Guards screamed orders, some running to their posts, others deserting altogether. A truck backfired in the courtyard, its driver shouting curses before grinding the gears into motion. Prisoners shouted through their doors, voices rising in a chorus of hope and fear. And then the sky tore open. The roar of engines descended. Allied planes swept overhead, so low he swore he could see their markings. The scream of diving fighters pierced the air, followed by the brutal crash of bombs tearing the earth outside the prison walls. The ground lifted beneath him, plaster rained from the ceiling, screams echoed down the corridor. The war had come to his doorstep. Through the chaos, the Germans made their choice. Some ran. Others turned their fury on the prisoners, rifles clutched with shaking hands. But before they could act, another blast shook the walls, this one closer, so violent it tore part of the roof free. Smoke and fire filled the air, choking, blinding. The pilot dropped to his knees, coughing, but in that smoke he saw it, the impossible. The gates had been hit, shattered, and through the haze came voices, not German shouts, but English, clear, familiar, strong. American voices. The door to his cell rattled, then burst open. A soldier in a soot-streaked helmet appeared, eyes wide. He shouted, "Come on, we've got you!" The pilot staggered forward, weak but alive. For the first time in endless weeks, he felt air on his face that didn't reek of captivity. In the courtyard, amid the ruins of stone and smoke, Allied soldiers surged like a tide. Prisoners stumbled out beside him, some weeping, some laughing, some too stunned to make a sound. And as he crossed the threshold of that shattered gate, the weight of it hit him. He was free. He turned once, just once, to look back at the prison, the walls that had tried to hold him, the corridors that echoed with threats, the cell where silence had been his only weapon. He chuckled softly. It was gone now, just ruins, just another scar on a land already covered in scars. He breathed deep, filling his lungs with freedom, with smoke, with the raw living air of survival. And in that breath he made a promise. For those who didn't make it out, I will remember. For those who gave everything, I will live. And then he stepped forward, joining the soldiers, vanishing into the tide of liberation that swept across Europe.
And that, my friends, is the story of endurance, of silence turned into strength, of a man who stood unbroken against the weight of an empire. If you felt this story stir something in you, if you felt the courage, the fear, the hope, then I invite you to stay with us on this journey.
These stories are more than history. They are memories carried across generations, waiting to be told. And every time you listen, every time you share, you keep them alive. So, if you enjoyed this storytelling, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue to bring these moments of history back to life. Until next time, thank you for listening, and remember, some stories never fade.